Okay, I thought I would pop on here, go live for a little bit, and I thought I'd go through your comments. So I've currently got my computer screen open, like two halves, so that I can see anything that comes up in the chat if anyone comments there. But also, I can obviously see comments that have been posted on my videos, and that's what I'm going to read through. I'm bound to get many of your names wrong, so bear with me. So I've, as you might have noticed, changed the time that my videos go live. Normally, my videos go live at 8 a.m. here in the UK, and I decided to try out posting my videos live at 1 a.m. here in the UK instead. So this morning at 1 a.m., my latest video went live, and the reason for that timing is that most of the people who watch my videos are from America, and most of my views happen between about 3 a.m. and 6 a.m. ish, 3 and 6 or 7 a.m. UK time. So it just made sense to post my videos earlier to see if that affects kind of how the videos do on YouTube, anything like that. So I've tried the most recent one at 1 a.m. Next week's video will go live at 1 a.m. as well. And if that works out, then obviously I'll carry on doing it at that time. I don't have that many UK subscribers compared to US subscribers. So it just makes sense to try and fit them more around when US people happen to be online watching my videos. So No Name for You commented this morning that my latest video, so today's video, says I like the video as much as the audio. You've got a calming presence. Thank you. So thank you back. The video is really just me staring at a camera, but if that's calming, that's a good thing. Jan Miller saying that my latest video was helpful, didn't want to open her eyes after the count of 30, very relaxing, falling asleep, but comments that there was a loud voice saying about the whole thumbs up reminder thing. You know, it might have been one of mine saying, if you like this, give it a thumbs up. If you aren't already subscribed, subscribe, all those sort of things that YouTubers say. But I never ever, any video that's designed to send you to sleep, designed to help you to relax, any self-hypnosis, guided meditation video, anything like that that I do, I would never do that part at the end of the video. So I get some people who comment from time to time saying, stop asking people to comment and give thumbs up and subscribe at the beginning of the video. That's supposed to be done at the end. And I normally end up replying, pointing out that I don't want to do that at the end, because the last thing I want is to say, okay, this is going to help you fall asleep. And then just as you fall asleep, you have my voice booming out, like this video, subscribe, etc., etc. So I always do it at the beginning, get it out the way. And I don't expect people to obviously like a video before they've watched it, but I want to give that reminder that if you end up liking this, it's really handy if you can give it a thumbs up, because that obviously helps YouTube to know people like it, which hopefully helps views. So what sometimes happens though is I think people have my videos, YouTube, I think by default has everything on autoplay. They want people to watch as many videos as they can. So by default, even if it's not in a playlist, YouTube normally auto plays videos. So you have to turn off autoplay to make sure that you just get the video you want to watch, not that video and then another video or another ad at the beginning of another video comes on after it. Because I think everyone's probably had where an ad comes on at the end of the video for the ad for the beginning of a next video, and it's like an ad for the Avengers film or something, and all of a sudden you've got this booming sound blaring out at you, waking you up just when you've spent half an hour falling asleep. So any voice that was saying about giving thumbs up and stuff, that would be from whatever video comes after mine, not my video itself. B Le Bleu, that will be said wrong, I'm sure, said that they started laughing at my video. That's I've replied to that message. That's something that obviously doesn't happen often, but there's a video somewhere, I think on my channel, unless I've removed it, where I'm hypnotizing somebody, and I had never done a rapid induction on this individual before, and so I thought, I'm going to do a rapid induction on you because I want to do this on camera. I've done rapid inductions on people before, but had never done one on camera. And this is going back a lot of years, probably about 15 or 18 years. And so I wanted to do a rapid induction on camera, and I'd never hypnotized my friend doing a rapid induction. And so he was curious as well, thinking, yeah, you've never done a rapid induction on me. I'd love that. Let's do it. So I did this rapid induction, Richard Bandler's kind of hand to face induction. And as his hand came towards his face, he suddenly cracked up laughing when his hand was kind of there in front of his face. And he then, I said, why'd you laugh? What happened? And he said he thought of the face huggers from Aliens with his hand coming down his face. He just imagined it was a face hugger coming at his face, and that made him crack up laughing. And then every time I tried to hypnotize him, doing the same induction, so, hi, I'm Dan, I take his hand, I put it up, and say, look at that spot on your hand, and notice how as it gets closer to your face, you go deeper and deeper into hypnosis. And as it was coming forward, every single time it would get in front of his face and he would crack up laughing. And so that has happened before, and we then had to just change seats to stop him laughing. I think that's probably still on my channel somewhere. It's a very, very early video of me, a baby-faced Dan, doing hypnosis nearly 20 years ago. Someone commenting, Patty Fesco, something like that. So I do apologize over and over again, I'm sure, about getting people's names wrong, usernames wrong. Saying that you listen to the stories with grandkids, you really like the stories, but don't like the pauses and find that they're too long. And could I make them shorter? The pauses in my stories are already ridiculously short. It is very, very rare for me to do a pause longer than 10 seconds in my current modern day stories that I've been doing. So since about 2016-ish. Very rare to have a pause longer than 10 seconds. And generally the pauses are no longer than 3 seconds. That is definitely not long enough for a pause, given the nature of my stories. My stories aren't just... woohoo, I actually have someone who I'm talking to now rather than just myself. Ferris Faye. Yeah, my stories aren't just about me telling some story like reading a book to someone. They're designed for helping people to fall asleep. And because of that, I have to tell them in a certain way. I have to structure them to make sure that they mirror the process we all go through. If you fall asleep properly, you go through a process of your body starts relaxing and becoming inactive, and you normally have some chatter in your mind, but gradually that dies down and visual imagery, woohoo, a second person, visual imagery starts appearing in your mind, kind of like a reverie or a kind of a very light dream. And you kind of start drifting into that state, and that forms more as your body becomes stiller and stiller. And at some point, and normally you're not aware of when, your body becomes cataleptic. Your body gets paralyzed so that you don't move because you don't want to act out your dreams. That's not particularly good. So your body becomes paralyzed, and then you just become more absorbed inside your mind, and you drift into the rapid eye movement state, which is the dreaming state. You start having dreams, and at that point, your internal dialogue pretty much has shut up, and you're just focused on the sort of imagery in your mind. So not just visual imagery, but what you can hear, what you can feel. You're focused on all that sensory internal experience. And so my stories are designed to try and mirror that process where you're lying there stationary, hopefully in bed, and I'm telling a story, but my story starts off at a more normal kind of pace, and then gradually as time goes on, I try and help while you're becoming relaxed. I talk in a more relaxed way to try and mirror guiding you into that. I have transitions in the stories, but also it takes a lot for your unconscious to do all this stuff. It's not something you can consciously do. You have to have time for it to come. It's an experience. You have to have time for the experience to form. So when people comment about how they want the pauses to be even shorter and want me to essentially just talk endlessly with pretty much no pausing, that is okay for a story, but it's not okay for something to send people to sleep, because you don't have time between what I'm saying to form the actual kind of inner experience. I want you to experience the story, not just hear a story. Or a third person. So, for example, if I say, I don't know, you're sat next to a tree, or the character sat next to a tree, and they lean their back against a tree, and they can hear the rustling leaves above them. I could just say you can hear the rustling leaves above you, and then just carry on talking, but that doesn't give you time to actually hear the rustling leaves above you. Whereas if I say you can hear the rustling leaves above you, and I wonder what that sounds like, or you can hear the rustling leaves above you, and perhaps gazing off into the sky, I wonder whether the sky is just clear or whether there's some clouds in the sky. And I've just put a I wonder kind of comment out there. And then inside the person's head, they look up at the sky and they think, is it clear or is it cloudy? And they can see clouds or not see clouds. But that takes time to internally do that. It's not something that just instantly, for most people, it's not something that just instantly appears. Thank you, Sam. You have to build that experience. So if I talk about someone climbing a mountain and I'm trying to create some kind of sensory experience of what that's like, of like noticing things and perhaps hearing the wind and feeling the snow, whatever it happens to be, I want to give time, brief pauses to allow that. And my stories going back, this is something I find very odd about how society shifts. You notice it in films as well, that it used to be that a long pause, no one ever commented on it. I used to do stories back in 2007, 2008, 2009 on YouTube, and my stories would regularly have pauses that are perhaps 1, 2, 3 minutes long, where I would talk about maybe you've reached the top of a mountain and you gaze out over the view of where you've come from, and you gaze out maybe over a forest, a valley, whatever is in the story. And people would do that and happily listen to, well, not listen, have, say, a 1, 2, 3 minute pause while they're doing that in their minds. And I would almost never get a comment about the pauses being too long. And then about 2015, 2016, something shifted. I was still doing stories, and it's like approaching a decade later, but all of a sudden people started saying pauses are too long, don't like these long pauses. And so I started shortening the pauses a bit, because it wasn't just the odd comment, there was more and more comments. Then I got to a point where it was very rare for me to do a pause over about 15 to 20 seconds. And the comments kind of died down a little bit. And then they started coming in again. And so I then reduced it. And now it's rare to have a pause in my story longer than about 10 seconds as the absolute longest pause. Most pauses are about 2 or 3 seconds. And shorter than that, and I feel that it doesn't give any time for someone to do the inner work, not just creating that sensory imagery in your mind and having an experience of the story rather than just listening to a story, but also, and obviously then that leading to the reason why you fall asleep, because you're simulating sleep, you're simulating accessing the rapid eye movement state, you're accessing the dreaming state. but also my stories I write, I create them as therapeutic stories. So people who listen to a lot of my stuff on my channel are people who have quite significant sleep problems. And because they have significant sleep problems, I want to address the issues behind most sleep problems. So I don't normally address pain, but I do have people comment saying they've become pain free because of my stories. But what I do address is anxiety, worry, and stress, because they're the three things that are behind most people's sleep problems. That you're lying there still going over stuff from the day, that or going over stuff for tomorrow that's on your playing on your mind. Maybe work is really stressful. Think you struggle to handle things in life that are really stressful. You worry, all those kind of things. And so the reason again for the pauses is that if I give a therapeutic metaphor, because my stories are therapeutic, if I give a therapeutic metaphor to do with handling stress, anxiety, or worry, I need to give time for the person listening to click on the fact, sort of unconsciously click on the idea that's a metaphor, and to internalize that therapy. So there's a hypnotherapist who's my favorite hypnotherapist, Milton Erickson. He's like a sort of a guy that through most of the 1900s was doing hypnosis and forming the field of hypnosis as it is today. And he always said that it takes about 20 minutes from having a suggestion, whether it's metaphorical or directly given, like just saying you will do whatever, it takes about 20 minutes for that to become internalized, for the person to then act on it. And so when you give a pause that's much, much shorter than that, you're not giving time for them to properly act on all of these different bits and pieces. So one reason why my stories are so much shorter generally nowadays, I used to, nearly every story I ever did was about an hour long, going back to 2007, 2008, because there'd be these nice long pauses. It'd be a nice, slow, relaxed, gentle journey asleep, and it'd be therapeutic. Now it's like everyone just wants things fast paced, a bit like on movies. Everyone wants fast editing, fast paced movies, or not everyone, but a high percentage of people. People don't like long edits, long scenes, and a slower pace of things. So let me just move away from there and look at the comments a minute over here. Tillery, thank you. Glad the stories are helpful. Sam, yep, the idea, doing hypnotic stories is kind of an interesting one as the storyteller, because you have to try and get a balance between not making it so interesting that people want to stay awake to the end to hear the entire thing, because if you make it to the end, there's a higher chance that because you've made it to the end, obviously, you just end up awake. The story finishes and you're still awake. So you want to make it so that it's engaging enough. You kind of want it to be, it's a bit like happiness. When people focus on happiness as being like the goal, they're often miserable, because you achieve the happiness, it never lasts exactly as you want it to, and so you become miserable again. Whereas if the journey is the thing that makes you happy, then the happiness comes from that journey and from that striving. And that's kind of how I would define the stories, that the idea is that I want people to want to listen to the story. I want people to be engaged in the story and to think, oh, I quite like this story. Maybe be curious of where it's going. I have twists, and normally they don't go where you expect them to go. Someone finds a secret passage somewhere, or it starts off in one location, but then actually the entire story takes place in a dream world, because at some point during the experience, the person drifts into a dream, and then that's where the story really takes place. And then it ends with them coming out of that dream, but normally going to sleep somewhere, like camping or whatever at the end. So I try to make it so that there's unexpected bits that you just think, oh, I didn't know it's going to take that twist there, or whatever it happens to be. But what I don't want is to make it so that you have to kind of think, right, I've got to follow that character and this character, and I've got to follow what's going on there, and that there's multiple paths, and I've got to try and follow this and follow that. And I don't want it to be overwhelming or something that you have to kind of almost be logical about it and trying to follow it in that kind of way. I just want it to be, this is just an experience. If you don't get to the end of the story, it's not that important. And obviously sometimes you do want to know the end of the story, but I try to make it so the stories hopefully aren't so, and that's why I haven't done very many sequel type stories. I did the Dragon's Fire series, and the reason I did the Dragon's Fire series is because people kept saying to me, oh, it'd be great if you could do a fantasy series. And I thought, oh, I'd love to do kind of a fantasy series. I think that'd be fun. The trouble with a fantasy series is that people were saying, oh, I listened to the first Dragon's Fire one, but fell asleep before the end. So I haven't listened to the second one yet because I don't know what happens at the end of the first one. And then when they do listen to the second one, they said the same about that. Oh, I listened to the second one, but I didn't know how it ended because I kept falling asleep. So I haven't listened to the third one yet. So it was almost pointless having all the sequels, because as they followed on from each other, people invested too much in having to make it to the end. So I've done sequels of characters since then, where it's like, I don't know, the Fantasy Quest one has a boy going into a library, and that same boy goes into a library and has there's the Oasis Fantasy Quest story where it's exactly the same character. He's just now on a different adventure. So I've had characters recur, but not sequels as such. So it's trying to get that kind of balance of how it's done. Yeah. Some people. This is Ferris Fay. Yeah, I personally prefer longer pauses. Part of it is where the pause happens. So the idea is that you don't want a long pause early in a story, because any long pause early in a story, clearly that just gives time for your brain to be active, chatting away to you. And that's often the problem. So you want it to be kind of starting off normal paced, gradually slowing down so you follow along to it, so that when the pause happens, the experience of the pause, if it's done right, should be that when the pause happens, you weren't necessarily paying attention to the fact that I'm still talking. You're paying attention to what's going on inside you. And what happens is at some point during the pause, you suddenly think, I haven't heard Dan's voice for a minute. And it might only be, obviously, time distortion happens a lot during this kind of thing. I get comments where people say, why did you do a 20-minute pause in that video? And then I'll look at the audio file of it on like an audio program, and the longest pause I can find in the entire thing is, say, 10 seconds. But people have distorted time that much because in silence, they've got no reference, no time reference. So if they're not paying attention to time, they then have to retrospectively try and think, how long was that bit of time? So with the stories with a longer pause, how it should end up feeling is that when the pause happens, you just suddenly at some point during the pause think, I don't think I've heard Dan's voice for a little bit. But then obviously my voice kicks back in, hopefully not in a jarring way, because I carry on the same tone of voice as I had before the pause. So it matches and it's consistent. And most people don't find it jarring. There'll be some people who might do, but it's quite rare. It's far more rare if it's face to face, because I'm sat there responding to someone. Whereas if it's just an audio recording, clearly I can't control their environment and what state they're in at exactly the point that I start talking. Whereas face to face, obviously I pause for as long as that specific individual needs it. And then when I see that they've shifted their state by watching, say, the color of their skin, and seeing how that changes, maybe watching a subtle movement they suddenly do where they've been still for a long time. And so I know something has shifted a little bit, and then I can talk again. But how it should be is that you experience it almost like, is my voice still there and you're unaware of it, or is my voice not there kind of experience? You just suddenly are aware it's not there, but you don't have any chatter in your own head. And that's the state that I always find, I love it, that sort of state where in the pause, at some point, not only do you realize that you haven't heard my voice for a while, you don't know how long because you've not got any time reference, but you also are aware you haven't heard your voice for a while either. And that's kind of the ideal state to be in, because you're in a dialogue, shut itself up and is totally inactive. And that's what you want in those silent moments. You want it to be that you're actually focused on, what does the water feel like that your feet are in the kind of story that is being told? Or what does the bark on the tree feel like that you're resting against? What does the sound of the crackling fire sound like that you're sat next to camping? They're the things that I want the person to be focused on, so that they've stopped focusing on everything else. But you need the silence to do that, because as long as I'm talking, you're trying to keep up with my talking. You're not stopping and having the experience. So let me carry on going down here. Yeah, Amy commenting on the changes in pauses throughout time, so interesting. And I would agree that's something that people have commented before. But again, everything I do, my whole aim is to make things experiential, make it so you have an experience. I don't want it to just be you sat down and listened to a story be told. I want it to be that you've sat down or lied down and experienced a story, not just been told a story. The other thing some people sometimes comment on that annoys some people and other people couldn't care less is my changing between first person and third person. And some stories I will do entirely first person or third person, but normally I change that around, but people don't necessarily always notice. And the reason I change it is because, again, they're therapeutic stories. So I'll take you out of a storytelling context a minute. In therapy, say you're doing mental rehearsal, so we're not doing this metaphorical, it's just normal therapy. When something's third person, so say someone says, I want to have more confidence. To have more confidence, they need to know what the experience of being confident is. And so you would ask them questions about how would people know that you're confident? And they'd say, oh, people would see that I'm standing tall. They would see my shoulders are back. I'm breathing in a calm way. My facial muscles are all relaxed. I've got a bit of a smile on my face. I'm comfortable in how I'm presenting myself. They'll describe the third person thing. They'll describe, this is what I would look like. And it's very hard to have a judgment of things from inside yourself. So what you want is, what does a confident person look like? How do you know that, say, if someone can't think of a real person, how do you know that Superman's confident? Well, look at the way he stands. Look at this, look at that. So you get that third person description first. And then what you do is say, okay, try it on. Try on what it would be like to be that person. So you then go into first person, where you say, okay, so now have the experience, seeing through their eyes, hearing through their ears, feeling what they would feel, and just having their experience. And so then it's like, what does it feel like to have your shoulders back? What does it feel like to be smiling slightly, to have relaxed facial muscles, to have relaxed gestures, to be breathing in that relaxed way? What does it feel like? What's the experience of having that inner dialogue of a confident person? So you've done the third person bit first, and then you do the first person bit for them to kind of mentally rehearse what it's going to be like when they do this in the real situation. And then that's what I do in my stories, that I might have a character where you're watching the character get on with whatever the character's doing. And then at key moments, and it could just be maybe for 5 seconds or something in the story, I'll go into first person in how I'm talking about it. So the listener, so the person falling asleep, is suddenly associated into the story as if they are that character. And then I might go back after that moment. So it could be, as an example, that a character has trudged up a mountain, and then they turn around and they look and get a new perspective. You know, they turn around and look across the route they've just taken, the challenges they face to get up this mountain, all the hard work they've done, and how pleased they are with what they've achieved. That little bit I would do in first person. I wouldn't do it as that character now turns around and looks out. It'd be that character turns around and looks out, and as you look out, you see how far you have come. And so I've then gone temporarily into first person. And again, some people, because they expect a story to be a certain way, and they don't realize necessarily perhaps that my stories are done intentionally to be therapeutic, then they're done as I do therapy with actual real clients. It's just that they also help people sleep, rather than it just being you do therapy, use a lot of storytelling, and then they come around at the end and then go home. People then take it out of context and think this is just a YouTube storytelling video. Why is he suddenly changing from first person to third person? Why is he not specifying that this character is a male, or not specifying that this character is a female? Why is he saying they? And again, there's obviously reasons for doing that. That if you're going to do a story that's based predominantly in first person, where the whole thing is going to try and be therapeutic from the outset, I can't say he and she, because I don't know if it's a he or a she who is listening to the story. Because you could be either. So I have to make it so that it's just they're doing this, because you are just following the story and I don't know who you are. So they're kind of a bit off track there, but they're kind of some of the bits there. Yeah, I think, again, maybe it's because I'm autistic as well, that I like some of the longer pauses, because I telling stories, as say Ferris Fay, as someone autistic, you might have the same kind of experience, that talking itself is a hard thing. It's you kind of almost need to be saying to yourself what you're going to be saying out loud before you say it out loud, because you don't know, you lose words. I think it's anomia, where you lose track of words and you just suddenly can't find the words for saying things, and you struggle to process things and struggle to process language in terms of what something means specifically in a given context, because you hear it. Like, I love the washing commercial adverts that say the ones that are like the washing tabs for going and washing your clothes, and they have the the sort of safety boxes, and they'll say at the end, keep away from children. And all I ever hear is that they're advising that you should keep away from children. It takes a while to process the fact that I've just been watching a commercial advertising washing stuff that could be harmful to children, and that what they mean is keep the product away from children, because they don't say that. They just tell you to keep away from children. So trying to process things, you kind of need time just to allow that processing to happen. Obviously, I always agree with the whole keep away from children thing. They're very noisy creatures, and very chaotic at times. So I find it much, much easier when there's plenty of pausing, plenty of slowing down, but also when I tell the story, I have to go at a certain kind of speed, because I need to pause for me as well, telling the story. I've done some videos where I've thought, I'm going to try and be a YouTuber like YouTubers are, where you do this, hi, I'm and you do that whole fake, stupid, over the top, over enthusiastic thing that most people probably aren't when they turn the camera off. And I couldn't keep it up, not for a single video. I would start doing that and I would fall over my words and I'd make so many mistakes and I'd have no idea what's going on. I'd feel drained and I'd have to go and sit in my bathroom here at home has no windows. And so when you're in there, if you didn't have a light on, obviously it's pitch black. And I would have to go after doing a YouTube video like that and sit in there with the lights off and just think, right, I've got to get myself kind of back. That's taken so much energy and so much out of me. I just need to sit here for the next 2 or 3 hours, just in absolute silence. and that's what I'd have to do. And so, although I'd love my YouTube channel to be more popular, and I regularly get people saying, well, you'd be more popular if you were more like a YouTuber, I just can't do it. I can't do the whole over enthusiastic, scream at the camera, create funny faces, and do all the things that YouTubers do. It's very weird. Yes, Amy. I'll get down to the bottom of these in a minute, hopefully. Amy, yes, yeah, it's more about the description, the story. Some people have said, "Oh, this is so annoying. You're just going into." I think I might end up reading it, but someone commented reasonably recently saying, "This is painful. It's like pulling teeth. You just go into every single description. It's like listening to an old person tell a story." And obviously, that's the whole point, that you're trying to get into the description of the sensory experience, not just if. As someone who's autistic, my novel, The Hypnotic Assassin, I think anyone reading that can tell it was written by an autistic person, because it's blunt and to the point right from the outset. And it was very hard to write enough words to create a novel when you're just writing the story in a very blunt way, a very matter-of-fact way. There's no sort of flowery descriptions of different things in the scenes or anything like that. It's just very blunt, very to the point. But when I'm doing something like the stories to help people to sleep, the idea is that dreaming is, the rapid eye movement state is a sensory experience. You have feelings, you have inner visual information going on, you have inner auditory information, you have all this stuff going on through senses. And so you need all that sensory stuff to be there. You need to draw attention to it. And some things that increase trance and increase focus is narrowing down on finer and finer detail. So the quickest way to hypnotize, say, a smoker in a hypnotherapy session is to say, tell me about what it's like to have a cigarette. And they might start off by saying, well, I just take it out of the box and I light it and I start smoking. But if you then say, okay, so how do you take it out of the box? How do you open the box? How do you choose which one in that box to take out of the box? Which hand is it in when you take it out of the box? Do you change hands with it when you get the lighter? What do you do next? Take me through every fine detail. And then they have to go into a trance, back into that smoking trance, essentially. They have to go back into it to experience the finest details of that process. What does that cigarette smell like? Can you smell it when you get the box out your pocket? Can you smell it when maybe it's the first time you smell it when you open the box? Or does it have to be when you've picked the cigarette up and it's nearer to your mouth? Can you only smell it when it's lit? So you ask for all this fine detail, and then they go into a deeper and deeper trance because they're narrowing their attention further and further. And that's all trance is narrowing attention further and further and further. Amy, there's tons of, I've got a course. If you use $10 deal, you can click on the link on my website and get it for just $10. But I've got a course on teaching how to do hypnotic storytelling like I do on here, including the client session that shows me doing it live, where I just, over a couple of minutes, ask the client some questions, and then I create a story based on their answers, so that all the metaphors come straight from the client. And I go into lots of detail about the different things you put in, like the layered metaphors and the sort of different meanings things can have, the uses of whether you say he, she, they, things like whether you, how you kind of, whether you use first person, third person, at what points you use first person, third person, how you use silence, all different things, when to be vague and when to be specific, and when to be vaguely specific. So what I mean by that is, say, for example, I'm telling a story and I want you to have a stream in your experience. It's no good, say I've helped you to, I'm talking about walking through the woods or something, and so I've helped you to build up this idea that you're in the woods. It's no good me saying, and then you decide to cross that stream beside you, or the character decides to cross that stream beside them, if the person in their own mind is thinking, but there isn't a stream beside me. I don't remember this happening. When did that happen? So you've mismatched their reality. So what you do is you say, and I wonder when you'll notice that stream, whether you'll see it first or hear it first. And so you introduce it as something that you're saying, this is part of your experience. It's not a question of whether it is or not. The question is, have you discovered it yet or not? And so you then introduce elements like that, because the idea is I don't want my stories to mismatch the experience the client, or in this case, the listener on YouTube, is having. I want the person who's following along to this to have the experience that they create for themselves. And I'm creating a bit of structure, but I'm not telling you, right, that sky must be cloudy. If I want the sky cloudy for some reason, then I have to introduce that idea in advance so that if it isn't cloudy already, it's going to be. And if it is cloudy already, that's perfectly fine. So there's a lot to think about in how you do this so that hopefully the whole story doesn't mismatch what the inner experience is of the person who's following it. Yeah, Fredo, hope you enjoy my different courses. I think I've got about 15 Udemy courses. Currently, I've got a free one that's teaching hypnosis, which is the same as the hour-long video I've got on my web on YouTube teaching hypnosis. Yeah, can't watch this live now. That's fine. Sue's saying that you're conditioned to my voice, which again is another reason for half of what I do, how I do it. That I think someone commented, not on the comments I've got open here on the computer, but which are to do with the videos, but in the kind of channel community tab bit, something about listening to different stories rather than the same story, because they just feel that it would work better to have a different story. They sort of know how a story is going to go, and then they find it doesn't work for them. The idea is that you should be able to listen to the same stories and perhaps just have your favorite stories, because you get used to the fact that, almost like getting used to a hypnotic induction, you get used to the fact that this is how it goes. And so your brain instinctively knows where it has to go and how it has to act without needing to be told to do it. So for example, using hypnosis as an example, if a client comes in and gets hypnotized and I say, okay, just take a moment to close your eyes, and then I do something or other, and then the next time they come in at the relevant point in the session, I say, okay, just take a moment to close your eyes, and I do the same again, they know, that not consciously, just as a being, they know that's what I then respond to. So the more you listen to one story, the more you end up just having it that the following of it becomes more instinctive every single time you listen. So I listen to sleep stories, but I've got about 50 or 60, not my own, but 50 or 60 other sleep stories. I listen to my own as well, but I've got about 50 or 60 sleep stories in a sort of MP3 collection. And I listen to the same, perhaps 3 to 6 stories that I've listened to for the last perhaps 20 years or so. And my wife and I at bedtime will just put the same stories on every single night. We just press play and put the same stories on and listen to the same things over and over again. We don't ever kind of think to change the story, because those ones work perfectly fine. One of them we both find very funny. It works, but we find it funny because my wife knows a lot about hypnosis and stuff as well, because I talk about it a lot. And one thing that you do in hypnosis is you try not to do too much negatives. There's a time and a place for using negatives, but you generally say what you want people to have rather than what you don't want. And there's one part in one of the stories we listened to where it's about someone traipsing through a desert, and they're struggling through this desert, and then the narrator says, don't give up, don't give up. And all we can hear is that because the way the brain works is that you don't process the negative. You first of all create a representation of what you can create a representation of. You can't create a representation of don't give up, so you create a representation of giving up while you're traipsing through the desert, and then you have to figure out what would be an alternative of that, carrying on, or it could be just changing the scene, or whatever it happens to be. And so it kind of, that's how the brain works. So your first default, we know what it means, we know they don't mean what they say, but we just find it amusing that the way they've worded it, it would have been better to say something a bit more positive at that moment, especially when you're talking about struggling through a desert, and feeling thirsty and everything. How much is scripted? Very little of what I do is scripted. I'm trying to think if I've never really scripted. I can't do scripted stories. I have actually done a few scripted stories because they weren't done for YouTube. They were done intentionally to be scripts. And then I wanted to just read the scripts to prove that the scripts in the book worked. So it wasn't to prove to me, but it was that if I've created a product like a book of scripts, then I should be able to pick up that book of scripts, read a script to an MP3, to record it as an MP3 or on YouTube, and then say, this is one of my scripts from my book. And then people should listen to it, that, wow, that worked on me, and then go and buy the book because I've evidenced that it works. So I've done that, but ordinarily I can't work like that because I need the organic kind of part of the timing of not feeling like I'm reading something. And I go into the state that I'm trying to guide people into. And I've just always done client sessions where you essentially sit down with someone and just talk to them, and you use the content they give you and you turn that into stories or whatever you do. So the idea of scripting it is just a challenge. The thought that you'd read something from a script that's now rigid, and yeah, I just struggle with that. I use scripts when I've done some of my other types, like when I made my Jedi videos. I obviously made 18 videos or 19 videos for the Church of Jediism, and created a 3-part course for them on how to be a Jedi, essentially. So how to improve your communication skills, kind of doing some Jedi type mind trick stuff, how to improve relationships, and how to improve different areas of your life. And for that, I did it in front of a green screen. I had written out all the scripts in advance, and I've got like a teleprompter thing, and so I just set it up on there. But normally I much prefer just kind of engaging and going with what comes up. Sometimes I'll do bullet points. So if I think nowadays, in the old days, my stories, for example, I've got my one of my early stories from about 2005 was Adventures of a Prince. And I then remade that, I think in 2015 or something or other, because the audio quality was really bad. But my Adventures of a Prince story, I did it in like 2005, straight to it was a cassette recorder at the time, straight to a cassette recorder. I literally I decided to shut out all sensory stuff. So I shut myself in my bathroom where I had no windows, put the cassette recorder in front of me, turned it on, and thought, let's talk for an hour telling a story. And I knew the therapeutic outcomes I wanted. I knew I wanted this story to cover how to effectively get all of your basic emotional needs met, how to effectively use your innate skills and abilities, like your ability to use your imagination, things like that. I wanted it to cover all of that. I wanted it to cover how to handle stress and worry and anxiety. and uncertainty and all these different things. So I knew the therapeutic outcomes I wanted in this story, and then I just sat there in a dark room talking to a cassette tape for about an hour or whatever it was, and that was it. That's how I did it. So that's how I used to do a lot of my old stories that are on my channel. And then as time went on and I was creating more and more stories, it was harder to think with nothing to bounce off of. So I can create stories easily with a client because you say to the client, what do you want help with? And the client tells you, and they give you more information than you could ever use. But to do that to a camera is really hard. A camera doesn't give you the information. So I ended up creating a kind of storytelling app almost. It's just an HTML document I created where I can press refresh and it will say, here's a theme, here's a starting point, here's a couple of things that would be good to have as stages, and here's the way the story can end. And it will just be vague. It will be like a single word or a single phrase. It could be like mountain or whale or golf club, whatever. Just I came up with random phrases that would inform something about that section. And then I just follow that. So that's how most of my stories nowadays get done. That I literally just put this app thing on my screen and see where the setting is, and it might say, for example, desert. And so it's like, right, so this story is set in a desert, and then it might say diving as, say, the first stage. So I now have to figure out how do I create a story where diving happens to crop up at the beginning of it. It might then say mountain, and so I then have to figure out, okay, how can we go from diving to mountain, but within the theme of the desert? And so then that's how I create the story. I think, right, this helps me to make sure that my stories are always something where they're very kind of random, where they're not, because if you make a lot of stories, I've got like 120 stories on my channel. If you make that many stories, you want to somehow make sure that they're all different enough that they're not just all, oh, so the person wakes up and they go for a walk in the woods and then that's the end of the story. Yeah, you want it to be that somehow everything has some difference there, that people don't know from story to story where it's going to go. That's fortunate. There was a video. Let me scroll up a little bit first before I say what I'm about to say. My voice making people sleepy isn't good when you start, like if I do training courses. You imagine what it's like when I teach a diploma course. I don't teach my diploma anymore, but when I was teaching my hypnotherapy diploma course, you imagine spending 18 days where all I'm doing is talking, trying to teach hypnosis, and so I'm talking hypnotically all the time at you. And everyone's pairing up and then doing hypnosis on each other as well. Keeping away from children is a wonderful idea. I said your name right. Well, that's handy. And I agree not to be anything but myself. I have attempted to not be me quite often. Now I'm very openly, I just say, look, I'm autistic. This is how I am and who I am and how I talk and what have you. There was so what I was about to say is I saw that there was a news heading saying that everyone's saying Tolkien's name wrong, but I didn't actually click on it to see how you're supposed to say his name. I thought Tolkien was Tolkien, but I'm sure I'll find out that I'm wrong. Ferris Faye, what got me interested in hypnosis? When I discovered hypnosis before knowing it was hypnosis, as I talk about in my autobiography, Look Into My Eyes. But being autistic, when I was a teenager, I was struggling. I'd always been struggling with communication, but as a teenager, struggling with communication, no one tells you anything. No one gives you advice. It's assumed you magically know everything about communicating, and you magically know how you're supposed to be in different situations. And so when I was a teenager, Paul McKenna did a documentary, and this documentary was about hypnosis. I can't remember. I think it was, can't remember the name of it now, but it was about hypnosis. And as part of the documentary, you're not allowed to show hypnosis being done in its entirety on TV networks. So Paul McKenna said this. He said, we can't show how the hypnosis is done, but what I can do is you can see on the screen someone's going to be hypnotized. The sound will be off, and I'll talk you through what the hypnotist is doing to hypnotize this person. And I'll tell you what the hypnotist is looking for. And that transformed my life. At that point, I kind of had a bit of an interest in hypnosis. I'd seen Paul McKenna's stage show on TV. This is the early 90s, mid 90s. Saw Paul McKenna's stage show on TV. Had heard about hypnosis, had read a couple of self-hypnosis books, because that's all I could find in shops. And all of a sudden, Paul McKenna was saying that the hypnotist is looking for something. I thought it was all about scripts and about magic words that you just happen to say. Back then, I was very into, things like, as many teenagers go through a stage of, into magic, and not like magic like my uncle used to be a magician, so not that kind of magic, but I was into that as well. But magic like magical rituals and salt magic and psychic command and all these kind of things. I was really into, there's got to be a way of somehow making the world predictable and ordered, and making it so that you can get everything to work like clockwork around you. And all of a sudden, Paul McKenna is saying that as a hypnotist, you observe for something. And then he said, so what you can see is that the subject's face is going red. So there's more blood flow to the face as they relax, and their breathing has slowed down and their muscles have relaxed. And so he's saying all these observable things. And I thought, oh, I didn't know you could observe things on people. I didn't know that there was like actual facial expressions that you could observe. I knew obviously very overt, a big smile is, I assume someone's happy. A kind of big frown is someone's maybe angry or something. But I didn't know that there were things like skin color changes and all these things that people, non-autistic people, instinctively pick up on and respond to. I didn't know about any of that. And it was like a light bulb just suddenly went off in my head. And I thought, does that mean that someone who's relaxed has these different sort of changes to their face and their body? Does it mean that if someone's angry, they have all these different things? Does that change the blood flow to the face? Does that change what the lips look like? Does that change what the forehead looks like? And so I started going through thinking, are all these observational things that you can look at associated with other things other than just hypnosis? And I found they were. So that really got me into hypnosis, because it was the only subject at that point that had ever taught a single thing about communication skills. Nothing in school taught communication skills. Nothing from parents taught communication skills. No one else taught a single thing about communication skills. The only thing that taught communication skills was hypnosis. And so I then quickly became very obsessed, and became obsessed with things like looking at how much blood flow goes to the lips and the changes to the lines on the lips, depending on how much blood is there, looking for the pulse in the neck, and then trying to figure out the beat and work out, is the pulse fast, slow, speeding up, slowing down? Has the face gone redder or paler based on blood flow to or from the face? Are the muscles in different parts of the face relaxed or more tense? What kind of movement is there in the body, in the face, in the neck? What kind of breathing is there? Is it shallow breathing, deep breathing? So I suddenly became obsessed with trying to work all that out, and then trying to figure out, okay, so when someone's angry, or even when someone's just annoyed, what is the body language for that? And so I started trying to learn, as an autistic person, started trying to learn that. What is the body language for someone who likes you? What's the body language for someone who's feeling intimidated by you or who doesn't like you? And so I started using what I'd been learning from hypnosis, and just became really kind of obsessed with that, and then learned about people like Milton Erickson and about his work and more of the indirect techniques, and realized I've been doing a lot of that already. So as an autistic person in primary school, I hated going and talking to things like teachers. And so what I found was, if you have one best friend, you can manage to avoid a lot of human contact. So I'd have one friend, and I would be doing, say we're paired up and we're doing some work that most people find boring, and I'd say, look, I'll crack on and get this done. But I'm thirsty, so while I do this, would you go and ask teacher for some water? And so you would then send your friend to do the communication with real people that you don't want to do. They would think, I'm more than happy to go and talk to a teacher so I don't have to do this maths work or whatever it is. And so they would go and do the thing that I find difficult, that they think is really easy, going and interacting with a teacher and getting some water for me. And I would get to just sit and do maths work in school, or whatever it happens to be that they find boring and don't want to do. Likewise, another primary school example is when playing games, you'd go out into the playground and you'd all be stood around, and someone would say, what game are we all going to play? And you don't really want to play any game, but it's sort of expected of you. And so I was born in August. I'm a small child. I was one of the youngest in the class. I would suggest something like Manhunt or whatever. And what I found was, if it was a good idea, the kids next to me would start suggesting Manhunt. And then the kids next to them would start suggesting Manhunt. And eventually the big kids who make the actual decisions would say, I think we should play Manhunt. And we would end up playing Manhunt. So what I learned years later was, when I was learning hypnosis, was that all of this is just hypnosis. So I would see that happen to lots of kids, but the kids would sulk. They would say, I came up with that first, I should get the credit for that. And they would sit in the corner and sulk. I took it as, we've got to play the game I wanted to play. I couldn't care less whether I got the credit for that or not. And that's how I do therapy, that I want clients to change, but I don't want the credit for the change. I want the client to think, I did that 100% myself. It came from within me. I don't want it to be, I couldn't have done that if it wasn't for Dan. That's the last thing I want anyone to think. I want people to think, I only did that because of myself. And I only got all that from, or realized I'd been doing all that because of learning hypnosis, and then learning about Milton Erickson, then making those connections. So what else? One of my favorite bedtime stories is My Adventures of a Prince story that I made years and years and years ago. And I'm trying to think, there's one I thought the other day, I quite like that. I quite like my one with the autistic boy, because I made it kind of about me, but not me, if that makes sense. I kind of was thinking of myself selfishly when making that story. That's the one with the boy and the teddy bear, and he goes and sits by a lake and has this little adventure thing. So I quite like that one. For some reason, that got a lot of thumbs down, so I don't think other people like it, but I do. Yeah, I get people who do say they're surprised by my stories not being scripted, but then partly because I'm autistic as well. So some people have commented that because of being autistic, they expect that I like structure, and part of that structure obviously would be to script everything. But actually, I do like structure and routine, but I just find it very hard for my brain to work in a way that makes things scripted. I find there is a process that happens with every sentence. There's a process that happens with what's going to come next. And for me, that works fine. When I give talks as well, people have said, I've given talks, say, about autism or whatever. People have said, I'm surprised you're autistic. You're able to talk to us all here perfectly fine. And I always point out, well, this is an artificial situation. I'm talking from the front to a bunch of people. I'm telling you what I want to tell you. You ask questions. If I don't know the answer, I say I don't know the answer. And if I do know the answer, I tell it. It's not like a conversation, or it's not reciprocal communication. There's no dialogue going on. It's I talk at you and respond to your questions talking at you, and you're all here to listen to me. There's no kind of starting a conversation or anything like that. So it's a totally different type of situation. If anyone spends any length of time with me, then they start noticing, oh, Dan's pretty much just sitting in silence in a corner on his own. So then you kind of notice. But yeah, there are some bits that I think people get surprised by sometimes. Brent, I'm glad that the stories have helped, and hopefully have found things that have helped with depression, anxiety, etc. Why aren't people using the diagnosis of Asperger's anymore? And I've heard the name had changed. Well, what happened was, when they were coming up with what to put in the diagnostic and statistical, the DSM-5, whatever it all is, when they were coming up with what descriptions to put in there, Asperger's had always been seen as a form of autism, but it was its own diagnosis. There are some benefits, I think, to having that, but there are also some disadvantages. What the decision was is that actually all autistic people are autistic. So breaking it down and saying, oh yeah, they're autistic, but they've got Asperger's, didn't sort of come across as a valid argument. There are lots of things that I think people get very confused about with autism. So that's why it was stopped, that it was just decided medically that you're either autistic or you're not. And so it just wasn't helpful because people weren't getting the help they needed. So say you had a diagnosis of Asperger's, you might not get the help you need because people will say, oh no, that's like the light form of autism. That's not like real proper autism. And actually, that's a bit of a myth. You can have Asperger's and have meltdowns. You can find yourself incredibly lacking in common sense in some settings, but then incredibly have brilliant common sense in other settings. You can have lots of challenges. It's not an easy ride having Asperger's. So, but what was happening was people were focusing just on the good parts of it and seeing it as, oh, that's like high functioning. That means you're excellent. You cope perfectly fine. It's just very mild. And all these kind of terms, the idea was to try and get rid of all those terms, because when people say, oh no, they're low functioning autistic and they're high functioning autistic, the low or high functioning part relates to the learning difficulties that the person has, rather than whether they're autistic or not. So some people, for one reason or another, may have significant learning difficulties or may not have significant learning difficulties. Some people may have worse symptoms at certain times in their life versus other times in their life, or certain behavior patterns that have just suited them well, say, for example, at managing stress for themselves. And it ended up being that everyone who's autistic is on the autistic spectrum, but you all have a range of things that you find difficult and things that you find quite easy. I try not to talk about things nowadays like low functioning, high functioning, because I know some people clearly need a lot more care and support and are never likely to be independent because of learning difficulties they've got and whatever else is going on for them. And others can be more independent, can kind of engage in society more. But that doesn't mean they don't also have lots of problems going on at the same time. They have lots of kind of, they suffer with anxiety, they suffer with sensory overload. They maybe have black and white thinking that means they might get very angry out the blue. There was something I saw recently on Twitter where there's a big sort of explosion of how one camp of people mainly parents, were attacking autistic people who say don't treat autism as a disease. Don't treat it like a disease. Treat it as something where, yes, you've got challenges and you need help and support, but it's not something that needs curing and eradicating. And then the parents predominantly were saying, well, my child has what in the old days would have been probably classed as low functioning autism or Kaner's autism. So the kind of classical traditional autism that people imagine when you think of an autistic person, rather than say someone who in the old days would have been diagnosed as having Asperger's. And they were arguing, saying, if you saw the life my child has, then you would want to be treated. You'd want to be cured. You'd want to not be born with that. And in the article I read that a lot of the Twitter posts referred to that have been written about this argument, they were referring to saying this, that the autistic people who say, no, treat us with respect and treat us as individuals, etc., they were saying they're making it hard because they're kind of disregarding those who struggle, and that they shouldn't have such black and white thinking about these things. And I just had to kind of laugh to myself when I heard that, because one thing with autistic people is you're black and white, and that's how you see things. So it was kind of like the argument was disregarding an autistic trait as not being allowed when the autistic people has it. But I think that there are lots of it. I started my career in 1997 working in mental health. Before that, I worked in a holiday camp, so I won't go there. But I started in mental health in 1997, working with people with schizophrenia, manic depression, as it was known back then, and severe OCD. But there was also a lot of people with autism in the places I worked as well. And so that's where I first learned about autism. Then I moved into working with children and teenagers and supporting them. And a lot of those children and teenagers were autistic. And that was why they were having a lot of their behavior problems that had led to them being in care. And some of them were very, using these terms again, very low functioning, but were some of the happiest people around when their environment suited them and was fit around them and their way of processing things and their way of interacting. Yes, they were going to probably forever and ever need to be either in the care system or in a supportive family or something. But that didn't mean they weren't happy with their life and with their experience of life when life was set up around them. It's a bit like someone, I don't know, having a disability, and because they have to, I don't know, say having no legs or something, and because you have to go upstairs every single day, clearly you're miserable. But once it's made that, and you're happy in the office upstairs, you're happy when you don't have to go up the stairs. But the fact that every day you've got to go up these stairs and no one makes allowances or changes the environment to help suit you, that really annoys you. And then everyone's blaming you, saying, well, they should be put down. They've got no legs. How dare they sort of struggle and not have legs? And it's like it's blaming you for society not kind of saying we're all different and how can we accommodate difference in society. And so that's kind of how I know it's a bit of an extreme example. That's kind of how I see it. That what you want is to be able to make it so that there's a lift or something, so that people can actually have their difference accounted for, so that they can fit in society in their own way. So someone who has really severe learning difficulties doesn't mean that they're miserable and that they have no life. It just means that that needs to be accounted for in how they're looked after and treated. What I find is that often it's the people who are actually, and I think more compassion needs to come into the whole argument, but I think the people who, like the people who seem to complain most are those that are struggling with the person who's autistic, rather than the person who's autistic themselves saying, oh, I don't like this. There are obviously autistic people who wish they weren't autistic because the sort of autistic parts of them, as it were, are significantly negatively affecting their life. But even for them, that's like when I've been suicidal. I've spoken on my channel before about how I wrote a date to kill myself in my mobile phone. So if I haven't solved my problems by that date, kill yourself, because that's the easiest logical solution. So it's a very logical thing. But I've been suicidal, I've been depressed. And at that moment, when you're in that state, you might think, I'd just rather not be here, or I'd want that taken away from me in some way. But that again is kind of it's saying, it's focusing on the problem part. It's not focusing on, well, how could we make it so that the problem isn't a problem, and that thing you do fit it. Like, for example, if so with autism, if you've got sensory overload, how can you reduce that? How can you make it so that you can fit in with life without that sensory overload? If things make you anxious, what is it you have to do so that you can lead a life where things don't make you excessively anxious? So I just think a healthier way of looking at it is to look at how you can help people, rather than, hello Abby, help people rather than hinder people. So let me just scroll back a little bit. Hypnotherapy can be effective for erectile dysfunction. Obviously, if it turns out that it's organic in origin in some way, then it might not be. So if there's like damage done, then that's what the cause is. Then that obviously isn't going to be able to be treated by hypnotherapy. Hypnotherapy is literally just a form of therapy being used with hypnosis as a part of that therapy. So there's absolutely nothing magical or mystical about the hypnosis itself. That's just a way of focusing attention on where someone's attention needs to be in that moment. So the question really is making sure that the therapy itself, so the therapy part of the hypnotherapy, is focused on figuring out when that problem started, times the problem hasn't happened, when maybe you thought it might have happened, finding out the information that will give you the answers for what is the way forward with this problem. Purposefully learning communication cues has been really helpful, but even today, I'm in my 40s now, and I have to put a lot of effort into kind of consciously still doing it. So I've got lots and lots of books teaching all this stuff. I've watched lots of videos teaching all this stuff. I've had lots of practice doing this stuff. I've watched people in cafes, on training courses, all sorts of things. And I still have to consciously do a lot of the communication stuff that I do. It's not something, and obviously that's the autism part, it's not something that seems to become instinctive. So little bits and pieces of it seem to become a bit more instinctive, but a lot of the fundamental kind of reciprocal communication stuff and actually kind of getting theory of mind and being able to put yourself in someone else's mind and think, what do they think in this situation? What's the experience like from their point of view? All those sort of things I really struggle with, despite years and years and years of working in this field where I can obsess about trying to learn all this stuff. Yeah, it is about helping people to change themselves rather than. So yeah, I see it as, I've described it in lots of ways over the years, but I see it as like you're clearing the path for someone to find their own answers themselves. You give people a few little markers, a few pointers just to stimulate. It's a bit like in a job interview. I think job interviews are really, really easy. It doesn't guarantee you're going to get a job because you don't know who you're against. But to do well in the job interview, I think is quite easy because it's just someone asks you a question and you answer it if you know it. And there's a certain pattern that you have to follow in job interviews that you can learn. But one thing in job interviews is when someone asks a question, normally for some weird reason, job interview questions, people seem to like thinking, how can I make sure this question doesn't make any sense to the candidate? So they'll ask a question, you'll think, I have no idea what you mean, what you're going on about, but I've got to now answer you. And so what you do is just ask, what do you mean by that? And then, or can you give me an example or something like that? And then they give you an example. That's it, for example. And then they give you some kind of example. That one example hasn't answered your question. You've still got to answer your question and do your thing. What it has done is it's given you a hook to make it so that you now know what you need to do. You know what kind of direction to head in. And so as a therapist, I think that's all you're doing, is that you're not saying to people, I'm going to tell you what you need to do and how you need to do it. So there are times you have to do that. In my line of work, I've worked a lot in social care where you have to tell families, if you don't make these changes, your children are very likely to get taken away. So you need to be doing X, Y, and Z. How you do that, that's down to you. But you need to do these things, because if you don't, you lose your children. So there are times when I've had to be far more direct with people, but generally what you want is to just give people some pointers that they can then build their answers from, because their answers will be relating to that kind of thing, but they won't be that thing, because that's not their answer. And you want it so that people take responsibility and ownership of whatever their answers have been. Yeah, I even getting diagnosed autistic, I kind of suspected I was autistic because of the sort of work I'd done long before I went for a diagnosis. And part of it was that I thought, well, every human being is just a human being. If everyone's treated with respect and kindness, and everyone's treated to suit, so if someone, I don't know, say someone had shyness, you're not going to get much support by saying that you suffer with shyness. But if you've got shyness, you should get support. If you say, look, I'm really sorry, but I can't work in this office in that location, as an example. So say you were told, go and work in the middle of an open plan office, and you felt everyone's going to be staring at me and I'm really uncomfortable and I'm shy, and so I can't do that. You want people around you to just say, okay, fair enough. What can we do to help facilitate you getting, we can get the best out of you in doing your job? Oh, well, if you put me in the corner of the office, maybe if you put desk dividers up so that I feel like I've got a bit more privacy, then I won't feel that shyness. They should be able to get that help. They shouldn't need a diagnosis to get that help. They should just be able to say, this current situation makes me struggle. So if I was in that situation instead, I wouldn't struggle. And they should just get that. There shouldn't be a question about it. Society should just say, okay, that's the sensible kind thing to do. And the same with being autistic. I felt that I shouldn't have to say to people, I shouldn't have to get a label to get the help. I should just be able to say, look, I'm struggling with this situation. This is what would help me to cope in this situation. And people around me should say, okay, then. And as long as I'm not asking for something unreasonable, people should just make allowances to help each other, because we all struggle at different things. So in an emergency, I'm actually quite good, because emergencies are normally quite structured. If there's a fire alarm goes off and you leave the building, and maybe you check the rooms on the way out the building, depending on the situation, but you have a process that you follow. So that's easy. I don't panic in things like a fire. But you send me into a shop to take an item back, an item of clothing back, and I'll pretty much have a breakdown, and I will be kind of getting really angry, and I'll be getting really anxious, and I'll be having lots of mixed kind of feelings and things, which does confuse me, because people say autistic people don't have feelings. I just think that we have feelings that kind of seem to crop up in unusual places from everyone else's point of view, and not crop up where everyone else expects them to be. So, with that, it should just be that you get help, and that people help each other generally, not that you need a label to get the help. So that was stopping me from seeking help. Hello, Amy. So that was stopping me from seeking help, because I was in that position where I was thinking, I shouldn't need a label. I shouldn't have to label myself to get an outcome. I should just be Dan Jones. and these are what I struggle with, and these are what I'm good at, and this is what I find easy and difficult, and that should be all it is. And unfortunately, that's not the way society works. So yeah, so I ended up having to get the label to try and get the help, because I was depressed and suicidal, and thought, well, the label, if I happen to be autistic, the label might help. As it was, the job I actually had, I lost the job by the time the diagnosis came through. But I'm here as well, so that's a good thing. Yes, picking up on social cues and figuring out people's feelings and opinions is ridiculously exhausting. And as I say, I'm 40 and I still find it exhausting. And my preferred option is normally avoid people so that I don't have to do that stage of reading social cues, figuring things out, trying to figure out their feelings, intentions, trying to figure out what I'm supposed to talk about, trying to remember not to tell people that they're boring and that I've got no interest, trying not to just talk over everyone about what I want to talk about because I've got no interest in what they're saying. And it's not that I'm a horrible person, because I don't think I am, but it is that I just think, well, isn't it an easier world if everyone is honest about things rather than lying about things and making small talk they don't want to make, and no one wants to be in that conversation. And to me, that's really confusing situation to be in. So I'd rather just be honest, and it takes a lot of hard work to try and think what's going on in your head and what am I supposed to do in relation to that, and to remember it all is really, really hard. So I've probably been here for a very long time talking. Let me just see if I can see how long. I can't see. Anyone who joined me at the beginning will know that I nearly 90 minutes I've been talking, so I'll probably have to wrap up soon. Yeah. Anyone that joined me at the beginning will know that I split my screen in half because I was reading comments on my YouTube channel on half a screen. And then obviously I wanted to be able to read current comments from anyone who's interacting with me on the other half of my screen. So yeah, I can often spot that people seem to be autistic, or seem like they're very likely to be autistic in people. Obviously, sometimes I'm wrong and I think, oh, you seem like you could well be autistic, but then I turn out to be wrong. But yeah, it does seem like something you can notice. You can notice the mannerisms and the way that they're either sort of engaging or not engaging with people. In my book, I've written a lot of books. Last year I wrote my 31st book. In my, I don't know if that can be seen, Death, Dying and Lost book, I wrote a piece in there about how different autistic people react to things. The fact that the same issue, so you'll get some people, I think someone commented on my video about, is it possible for an autistic person not to have social communication problems? And I'd said on a video here on YouTube, it isn't possible for someone who's autistic not to have social communication problems, because that's one of the diagnostic criteria. If you didn't have the social communication problems, you wouldn't be diagnosed autistic. And so I'd said that, and I gave the reason why, but people still commented saying, but I get on perfectly fine. I'm autistic, I get on perfectly fine. I can socialize. I love going out socializing. And what I had said in the video was the fact that it's social communication difficulties. That doesn't mean you don't talk to anyone. You can get someone that's ridiculously outgoing who says totally inappropriate things. That's a social communication issue where you're completely oblivious to the fact that saying what it is you you're saying isn't the right thing to be saying in that context or with those people. And that's kind of the point, that you're missing the social situation and the social kind of rules that you're supposed to abide by. And so you can spot autism in people, but it's not always, oh, because they appeared shy, that means they're autistic, or anything like that, because there is that they could come across like they're really outgoing and enthusiastic about things and really good at socializing, and yet really they're not good at socializing because they're saying and doing inappropriate things in that situation instead of the right things. Procrastinate and have self-sabotage. Well, hypnosis, as I've sort of mentioned, is just about focusing attention. So really, it's not so much about the hypnosis being best, it's about what therapy helps best. My personal view is something, and the research is that something more along the lines of a CBT type approach works best. There are problems with CBT. One, that you have to be very proactive in engaging with it and doing everything that comes out of the CBT. Another one being that they get things the wrong way around. Everything happens from the deep part of our brain first and then comes up to the higher cortex second or last. And CBT works on changing the way you think about things. The trouble is, by the time you're changing the way you think about it, you've already had the sensory information come into your body, into your being. You've then already had the lower parts of your brain respond, create a pattern of response and respond emotionally. And then your higher cortex and all your thinking is happening off the back of the emotion that's already now started forming. So CBT working on the cognition, actually you're working on it too late. You're trying to solve a problem after the problem has already started. And what you need to do is work on it further back. You need to make it so that you don't get that negative emotion in the first place. Things like hypnosis can help with that, and hypnosis makes therapies more effective. So the research, most of the research is done on CBT, but if you add hypnosis to CBT, for example, it makes it significantly more effective because the hypnosis part narrows your attention right down and just allows it so that as a being, you respond more instinctively to things. So that's a good way of, and I use a solution-focused approach as well. So my questions would be, when do you procrastinate? When don't you procrastinate? An important one is, when don't you procrastinate when you thought you would? So what are those times where you just naturally thought that you would probably find yourself procrastinating and yet you didn't? So something was different about that. So those sort of questions are where you find those gaps in the problem, those bits where the problem breaks down because some solution is there. So it could be that you didn't procrastinate because actually you found it really exciting, or because a friend motivated you, or because you had a target that for some reason you were happy to meet, or whatever it happens to be. It would be a personal thing for everyone, but whatever it happens to be. The same with self-sabotage. The question there is, when didn't you self-sabotage? What are those exceptions? What are the times, what goes on for you? What's the pattern of the self-sabotage? What's the pattern of the procrastinating? So that you can figure out where you need to intervene, so that you can change the process and lead in a different direction. Another question is, what is that a solution for? And this is a big question, but I'm currently writing a book that there's sort of a working title. There's no such thing as problems, only solutions. That every problem someone's ever presented with, say psychological problem, has only ever been a solution to a problem. It's never actually been the problem. And what I mean by that is, say a smoker will say, I want to quit smoking, as if that's the problem. But actually they smoke because of stress, or they smoke because they find that they overwork and that they never take breaks. And so the only way to take breaks is to have cigarettes, or they smoke because they find that that's a way of socializing, because you can say, oh, do you have a light? And so you've started a conversation. So it's a solution to a problem. It's not the problem. So the procrastination, what happens if you procrastinate? What's that solving? What's that giving you? Is it stopping you? Maybe is there a fear that if you do that thing, whatever it happens to be, that you might end up having to do something else that you don't want to do, or something that's scary? The same with self-sabotage. You get people who just take YouTube. You get people who say, I'm going to be a successful YouTuber. And then they will start doing YouTube and then start getting a bit of success and then say, oh, I'm bored with that now. I don't want to do that now. Something will crop up that self-sabotages. And then you find out that actually they've got this fear of perhaps being in the public eye, or this fear of whatever it is to come, that fear of being successful. There's some outcome of being successful that's scary, like maybe a certain change to their way of working or living life, or whatever it happens to be. There's something that actually this is protecting you. This is your way as a being. This is your way of protecting you from something. So I kind of look at a lot of problems like that. I look at problems as the problem itself isn't the problem. The problem either is a solution to a problem or it was a solution. So smoking could have been a solution to how to socialize as a teenager, how to fit in with your peer group. But then it becomes a habit where anytime your nicotine levels in your body go below a certain threshold, your brain says something's changed in my body. And because your body's not supposed to change that much, when it says something's changed in my body, then all of a sudden it sends a message saying smoke to fix the problem that's occurring. So then it becomes that. But that's still not the whole story, because nicotine leaves your system in 48 hours. So if you stop smoking, after 48 hours, nicotine's left your body. Within a week, you've got no nicotine addiction at all. Any addiction you've got will be to do with the habits, will be to do with the fact that there are things that solution is no longer the solution for. So, for example, I could hypnotize someone and tell them that smoking is like chewing on tar. I wouldn't do that kind of therapy, but I could do. And make it so that instantly they can't smoke because they think it's too disgusting. But what I've done is I haven't actually solved the problem. So the person then goes out in their life and tries to get on with life as a non-smoker, and they've got to, as a being, find a solution for that lack of the solution. And that solution could be a healthy, good solution, but it could also be a negative solution. Or it could be, which it often is, go back to the solution you already know. So you get people who then just go back to smoking because of the fact that the smoking was a solution that worked perfectly fine. Why change what works fine for you? And so you kind of have all of that. That's kind of my way of looking at it. That if you want to find a way over the problem, you need to look at how you can tackle those errors as well. So let's have a look. Really informative. Thank you. Yeah, being addicted to nicotine is a bit of a problem. Thank you. It's not every day that someone says that I'm awesome. Everything is awesome, but it's not every day someone says I am. So I'll probably wrap up in a bit. I'll just see if there's any more comments. I was planning on going through. I thought, I'll have plenty of time to go through all the comments from the last kind of month or so. Maybe not that long, but I didn't. Tara Adams had said a couple of days ago that my overcoming a fear of needles improved their life, improved their needle phobia, and I should be more noticeable. Someone said that my recent exploring a lucid dream story was a no from them. It was too slow and it irritated them. Snowy Wolf Gamer said I should have more subscribers. I would love more subscribers. If anyone has any ideas on how to get more subscribers, that would be very helpful. Someone said I'm the only storyteller who does the trip for them. So yes, Ferris Faye. Yep. Well, thank you for everyone who's tuned in and watched. Because this has gone on for quite a long time, I know once it goes live officially, I'm just changing my screen over so I can see how long. 1 hour, 40 minutes and 35 seconds. I know there'll be people that very quickly will give it thumbs down because I think, oh God, he's yakking for ages. But I'm grateful, obviously, to those. Once I go on long like this, so I sometimes will do a live stream and it might just be quite short. But once it goes on for a long time like this, it's normally because lots of people interacted. And even if not lots do, even if a few do, it's more about them, whoever's in this little corner down here on my screen, chatting. It's more about those people, making sure that they're the ones having questions answered and me being there for only caught the last 3 minutes. So it's more about the subscribers who've decided to join me here than it is about anyone else. I don't mind about other people then. I would do collaborations if I could find people to collaborate with. One thing that I've tried to do things like see if I can get other YouTubers interested in giving my bedtime stories a go, for example, or my other videos. I've tried to look into things like whether I can get, whether any YouTubers want to have me turn up and they can experience hypnosis. There's lots of people who have said to me in the past, oh, I'd love to experience hypnosis. So I've often thought, well, I'm more than happy if you're, say, a YouTuber, to turn up at your house or you turn up at mine and hypnotize me. And I'll hypnotize them or something. Not many people probably remember my ventriloquism videos. There are a number of videos where I've done it. Like there's one of me hypnotizing myself, sort of like this, trying to do ventriloquism. Can't do it very well live like this, but and there's some of me messing around with a microphone while I was waiting for a video to process, where I'm kind of going, hello, the microphone's not working, and doing stupid things like that. And ASMR, a lot of people have pointed out a long time ago. So with hypnosis, I've had clients in the past that are hypno junkies, and my view is that a lot of these hypno junkies are now ASMR people, or the people that like ASMR, and they would describe, oh, I'm a hypno junkie because, and they would describe it as, when I'm being hypnotized, it just sends a wave of tingling across my body, and they would describe this whole experience that they have. And a lot of people have that kind of experience when they're hypnotized. And so I used to make videos saying this is a deep trance experience video, and that it would trigger these kind of feelings because it's deep trance. It's not just it's literally just focused on the deep trance part. And so when ASMR came about, almost straight away, a lot of people were commenting, saying on my videos, saying about how they're having ASMR experiences with my videos. And so I then obviously looked up ASMR and thought, yeah, that's exactly what people being hypnotized into deep trance describe the experience as. So I obviously started doing ASMR videos. This is going back to 2011, 12, something like that. Started 13, maybe, don't know, doing ASMR videos, specifically saying ASMR. And I did do that for quite a while, where many of my videos and my stories and things were done intentionally with the idea that they would cause sort of ASMR kind of responses in people. And some people like that, but a lot of people didn't like it. And it's the same with ASMR. Obviously, there is a huge audience of people that like it, but there's also people who end up being really put off by it. They don't want mouth sounds, or they don't want whispering or whatever. So I have tried kind of focusing a bit more on things of mine being ASMR-ish, but at the same time, there's something that I'm happy to do ASMR in terms of the way I tell a story, for example, but the doing it like whispering, there's something about a male just whispering into a microphone that ends up sounding more sleazy than anything else, I think, for some reason. I don't know if others feel the same about that, but yeah, so I don't do that. I saw something somewhere here. Where was it? Oh, it's double inductions. Nearly all of my videos, this is going back to those who've been around long enough, nearly all my videos were double induction type videos going back to 2007 to 2011. So as many of you who've been around me long enough will know, I joined YouTube in 2007, and I then quit YouTube in 2011 because of lots of trolls kind of being very horrible. And I just thought that all I'm doing is trying to help people, and it's not worth just constantly seeing abusive comments when you're just trying to help people. So I deleted about 600 odd videos off my YouTube channel, and I came off YouTube until about 2015. I think I posted 1 or 2 videos in the meantime, but largely came off YouTube till about 2015. And all my previous videos, self-hypnosis videos and things, used to be largely double inductions with myself. So I would often do a track down the middle, if this makes sense. So you've got headphones in, I'd do a track that's like right in the middle of your head, and that's me talking and saying what you're kind of following. And then I'd do a left ear track and a right ear track. Both tracks would be independent of each other, but would be linked with the central track. And I would do things like having it so that you've got different, I'm talking to a different part of you. So the part of you to do with whatever the problem is on one side, and the part to do with, say, the solution or something on the other side, and it would cross over. So I used to do that. I also used to do a lot of, like there's a few of my tracks where I do staircase as part of the induction. And as you walk down the stairs, I talk about, you can step on step 1, or 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, or whatever it happens to be. But I spiral it around the audio bit. So it goes like, if you're wearing headphones, it sounds like my voice goes around your head and follows you down that spiral staircase. I did it with a 5.1 surround sound microphone once as well, where I literally did it live. So normally I would do it on a music program, editing in all the different bits of audio, but I decided let's just do it live. So I put a microphone, a 5.1 microphone, in the middle of a microphone stand in the middle of a room, and then just did it live walking around the microphone. And so when doing like the induction going down deeper, I'd be going down lower beneath the microphone, so that when you're then wearing headphones, you hear my voice going down to your stomach and hear it as if my voice is down in the sort of pit of your stomach, talking there, and all different things like that. So I used to do a lot of things like that, and a lot of layered vocal stuff. I used to do, for example, I do this in my stories, but I do this in lots of different things, and I do this especially with double induction type things, is we instinctively respond to patterns. We can't help it. And every pattern you instinctively respond to, because it's an instinctive response, it's a trance response. So what I would do is I would say do an induction track, do some kind of a process like a story or whatever it is, and then out of one ear or the other, you'd hear me saying something like A, B, C, D. And then the person in their mind, even without thinking, would go E, F, G. and they'd finish the pattern. And so that creates a trance, that creates a light trance. So, and then a bit further on, out of maybe the other ear, you might hear "Ba ba black sheep," and then you'd finish that in your mind. And then elsewhere in your mind, say further along the track, I might sort of go "Twinkle, twinkle," and then you'd instinctively say "Little star," and then you finish that in your mind. But each of those little pieces, they sound insignificant, but they are all really powerful hypnotic techniques. They all create trance. They all create these little mini trances that merge into the main trance. They're creating that automatic response over and over again. They're also doing a bit of regression, because these are the kind of things you heard when you were a child. And I'm not doing regression in terms of trying to get people to be back like a child. I'm just trying to stimulate some of that, a bit like priming works, stimulate some of that childish mindset, where when you're a child, you're more creative. If someone said imagine something, it didn't matter what they asked you to imagine. Most people just went, yeah, fair enough. You're a child. Imagine this brick is whatever. And you go, yeah, it is. Okay, fine. So I would do things like that, because, to stimulate that kind of creative, unconscious, instinctive responding, just taking things as being acceptable, rather than, well, that doesn't sound believable, and that kind of adult mindset we all kind of get. So I used to do a lot of that kind of thing, where I would do double inductions or do multi-layered vocal inductions, and it just takes a lot of time to do those sort of things. And obviously on YouTube, that's a lot of time put into doing it for very few views of it. And some people just used to complain and say, it probably would scare you. But it is done. I'm obviously talking louder here. But it's just like a little background, like you're hearing someone sing it in the distance in your mind. But yeah, so I used to do a lot of that sort of thing. I used to do a lot of having different sounds in them. So I would there's a youthfulness process that I did, where I would have the sounds of like children playing in the background as part of the youthfulness process, because the sounds of children playing primes you for youthfulness. And the priming research on it is that when you're thinking about sort of the idea of children, you become a bit more youthful, a bit more sprightly. And there's things like the study done with the elderly people in the nursing home, where they put them in a nursing home, but they set everything up in the nursing home as if the nursing home was really a home, say 30 or 40 years earlier than it was. So they had the radio would only play what was on the radio 30 years or 40 years earlier. The TV would only show TV programs that were on TV 30 or 40 years earlier. And all these elderly people stopped needing their walking frames and their walking sticks. They stopped needing, their vision improved, their fitness improved. And that was just because they were in an environment where everything was as if things were years earlier. So I sort of made things like a track, a youthfulness track using natural sounds of things like children playing and nature and all different things that make you more associated with those type of things. There's a couple of issues though with the sound effects. So it does take a lot of time to make a track which includes sound effects. I wouldn't be able to release one a week or anything, because if I have sound effects, I've got to then do the track and then find all the sound effects that I'm going to layer over it and then add all of them in, and it all takes time. But the biggest issue is you put all that time in, you upload it to YouTube, and then it gets blocked, because inevitably, and it doesn't necessarily happen straight away, but nearly every single one of my videos made like that, I was using royalty-free sounds that I had paid for the rights to use, and yet another artist somewhere, maybe with Sony BMG or something, would have a song that's got that one little tiny bit of sound in their song. So the artist that made that song obviously used the same royalty-free pack as I used, had obviously paid for the rights to use it the same as I had done. But because it's in a Sony song now, my video is the one that gets blocked. And I had this on a video that, going back about 2 or 3 years, one of my videos like this from about 2007, 2008 had some royalty-free sounds on like that, and it got blocked about 2 or 3 years ago. And when I looked up why it was blocked because a brand new song had just come out with one of the sounds that was in my video that had been around since 2008. So even though my video was clearly much, much older than this brand new song that had just been written and released that was now uploaded by Sony or whoever it was, my video was the one that got blocked and taken down because of it. And there was nothing I could do about it. I challenged it and they didn't unblock it, even though I said, I've got evidence that I've got the rights to use that little bit of background noise. And so I ended up just thinking it's easier to ditch the sound effects unless I can get every sound effect myself so that I know it can't be blocked because I've gone and got the sound myself or created it myself. I just don't use anything royalty free or anything now. So like the guitar sound on the beginning of some of my videos that I've been playing recently, that guitar sound is a friend of mine improvising. He came and improvised a chunk of guitar for me, and I paid him for that, and he's that's on there. So I quite like stories that have the sound effects. I like stories where if you're going down the Amazon, for example, in the story, you can hear the sloshing of the oars as you're going along and things like that. It's just the fact that I can go to a lot of effort to do that and then have it blocked and taken down, and there's nothing at all I can do about it because I'm just an ordinary person, and it's normally a big company that's taken it down. Yep, they do. The other thing, I'm saying that, yep, they do. No one knows what I'm replying to. That was a comment that filmmakers add familiar things, sounds and things to trailers and familiar songs to trailers. But yeah, another thing in relation to that, as an example of how easy all this is you think of the McDonald's jingle. Justin Timberlake did the "I'm Loving It" song for McDonald's, and where it sort of goes, "Da-da-da-da-da, I'm loving it" at the sort of end. And they ditched the whole song, leaving just the "I'm loving it" part. And then they ditched him saying "I'm loving it," but they still keep the words. And so what ends up happening is that because we complete these patterns, it's not you're loving it. It's not McDonald's saying you're loving it. It's you say to yourself, I'm loving it. So you watch the McDonald's advert, you hear and then you say to yourself, I'm loving it. And so you associate the idea that you're loving McDonald's with McDonald's. And they're not trying to convince those who already do love McDonald's and eat there all the time. And they're not trying to convince those who, when you see the big giant M, think, oh, McDonald's, I hate it. They're not trying to convince those people. They're just trying to convince the ambivalent people, those who would just go in any old burger bar when you're just sort of, I'm hungry, I'm out and about, where can I eat? Oh, look, there's a McDonald's there. They're the people they're trying to convince by doing that, so that when you then look at McDonald's, the M on the high street, you say to yourself, I'm loving it. You then have that kind of feeling associated with that to the big M, and then not the wimpy next door or whatever. So they're the people it's trying to convince, not obviously everyone, but it's playing on that idea of the fact that you complete patterns. So all they have to do is, and then they know everyone listening will say that sentence to themselves. It works for Alzheimer's as well. Thank you to Joanna for loving my videos. Yeah, I like sound effects. Yeah, sound effects are also a difficult one, Ellen. They're also a difficult one. The idea that the sound effect, if it doesn't match what you kind of expect or want, then that can be distracting. So it's attempting to get it right. And it is a balance. Some people don't want any sounds. What confuses me, for example, I have recorded lots of sounds where I've got out in nature, like into the woods, and I've just pressed record on one of my audio recording devices and left it recording for like an hour. And then I'll use some of that footage in my stories. And I used to do this, and I did it with one of my stories. I had the sounds of birds in a tree. I just sat under a tree, pressed record, and recorded the sounds of the trees, of the birds in the trees. And then I put that on the backing track on one of my videos. It's an old video, so it had a hiss on it. And I thought, well, I don't like the hiss, but I don't want to have to re-record the whole thing. If I just put a backing track on it it's a story set out in a woods. So if I put a backing track of bird sounds that matches the woods, because it's set in woods and I was in the woods getting the natural sounds, then it's not going to mismatch people's experience, because it is what it is. And people complained and said, I don't listen to stories. In fact, I've had about 3 or 4 complaints on that exact track, even recently, saying almost the same thing. I don't listen to stories to hear bird sound. I listen to stories to try and escape horrible bird sounds. Why can't you just put the sound of traffic or something in the background instead? Which confuses me, because I just think, well, it's a story about woodland walking. And a story about woodland walking, why would you want sounds of traffic? And if you hate birds, why listen to a woodland story? That confuses me. So it is difficult where if the audio doesn't match, if it's not quite, it's like when someone dramatizes a film. If you've got you watch a film of a book, even, so that made no sense. When you've taken a book, you like the novel, and then you watch the film of it, and then the film isn't how the novel is, and so it distracts you. And it could be a film that you think, you know what, I'd probably love this because I love the story. I'd probably love this if I'd never read the book. But it mismatches what you expect the characters to look like, or what you expect. For example, I like the Jack Reacher films with Tom Cruise, but I know Tom Cruise isn't going to be playing Jack Reacher in any future films, partly because he's really short, and Jack Reacher in the novels is 6'4" or whatever he is. And so they obviously have said, he doesn't match what people want. But as someone who at the point of watching the films hadn't read a Jack Reacher novel, it didn't cross my mind that he's supposed to be 6'4". Tom Cruise is perfectly fine as that character, so it didn't bother me. But yeah, it's one of those things that you're always kind of taking a risk that you're going to upset a bunch of people by doing it. But then you think, well, you'll also get an audience of people who just happen to like what you've done. One idea I had, that I think a few people, subscribers, have mentioned, is, can't I just release my stories, 2 versions of them all the time? One with nothing, just the story, and one with natural sounds or with sound effects or whatever. And I could do that, but that again is just more hard work to kind of do. And yeah, it feels like I'd rather just stick to I quite like things like the Slumber app, where anyone who listens to my stories on the Slumber app, you can bring in different sounds if you want. So royalty free isn't all it's cracked up to be. I have used lots of royalty free images before, where people have ended up stopping them being royalty free at some future date, and maybe they've become a famous photographer or something, and then all of a sudden your image, you get told, sorry, that image that you've used, I'm not going to let you use it anymore, even though you've paid for it as a royalty free image, expecting to use it by the terms of the agreement. There are probably lawyers specializing in YouTube disputes, but the reality is, as a small YouTuber, I'm less likely to be able to take on a big company like Sony And there's a big downside when you take you challenge things on YouTube. If someone puts in a copyright claim and I challenge it, saying, I think I've got the rights to use this, here's why, they say, oh, okay then, or they say, no, we're not going to pay attention. That's fine. But if I challenge it, if they say no and then I challenge it even further, you get to the point where you'll get a message saying you can now challenge this even further, but if you fail, then you can have a permanent strike against your channel, and you can get as far as you can have your channel taken down. So it just ends up getting too risky and too much effort and too much. I don't like spending my life focusing on fighting. I'm much more is it really a big deal? Let's just move on kind of person. So with things like sound effects, royalty-free versus not royalty-free, I've got a RAV drum I'm trying to learn to play. I've got a piano I'm trying to learn to play. I've got a violin I'm trying to learn to play at some point. A flute I'm trying to learn to play. If I can play all these instruments, that deals with a lot of the instrument type stuff. A guitar, I can't play anything, but I'm having a go. And for sound effects, I will go to cafes and record audio in a cafe. I'll go into town centres and record the sounds of people just walking and milling around. I'll go and have an audio recorder if I'm by a lake, or if I'm by a stream, or if I'm in the woods. So I'll record all these sort of things and get my own natural sounds that I can then use for things. So I do a lot of that myself, knowing that something could be similar, but I've got evidence that I've actually got the original file I've recorded it on. So that's more what I'm kind of thinking now is, and I've got Dreams on my PlayStation 4. That might not mean a lot to many of you, but one thing I've wanted to do since the announcement of that game years ago was to create videos of some of my stories, kind of that you can watch as well. So I plan on attempting that. Let me just see. 2 hours, 7 minutes I've been sat here now. Not complaining, obviously, but just suddenly realised how long. I've not yet, this will probably terrify people, not yet watched all the Harry Potter films. And I've not seen the Maze Runner series yet. And just to add to the conversation that's going on about Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter and all these things, the one that they're currently doing is they're just in the process of making a new version of Dune, the Frank Herbert novel. So I've no idea how that will turn out. Dune hasn't been particularly successful when it's been televised or turned into films. The TV series weren't too bad. They did Dune and Children of Dune. They kind of stopped there. I felt they needed to do at least the third part. There's a lot of Dune novels, but they needed to do at least the third part to finish that storyline, and they didn't. There was, I think, can't remember the person's name. There was a version of Dune that was never made. It got more and more expensive, and it was going to star or going to have Salvador Dali featuring in it and all sorts of things. That never ended up being made. It was too ambitious. There's the one with Patrick Stewart in it, obviously, and that's quite a good one. But I don't know how, but that's only because it's got Patrick Stewart in that I think that. But I know others didn't like it, and it's not like the novels, really. So it's very difficult, I think, people making things into films from novels. But anyway, it looks like my feed has gone off on a bit of a chatting about stories thing. Thank you to everyone who has joined me for the last 2 hours and 10 minutes by the time I stop talking. I might edit some of this down a bit, but it will definitely all be here. So you're allowed to talk about whatever you want. People engaging with each other is good. Um, if anyone has anything like story ideas of things that you think, oh, I'd love Dan to do this kind of story or something, I'm always happy to hear it. I'm always looking for different ideas and different things I can do. And obviously, if anyone has any ideas how I can grow my channel, I last year, as some of you, probably most of you who I can see at the side, will know, I did 40 stories back to back, which was a little bit too much to do. It's not easy doing 40 stories. It's not easy doing 40 stories back to back, but I did 40 stories, and yeah, I think the seat I'm on, my fat backside, I think, is sinking into the seat as I'm sat here longer and longer, warming this spot up. Either that, or I genuinely am shrinking. I'd rather shrink kind of that way than that way, personally. But yeah, so last year I did 40 stories in 40 days, and I'm not going to do that again because that was really, really difficult to do, really stressful to do. And it had a very big negative effect on my channel. People had said up to that point, just release more stories and your channel will grow quicker. But for my 40th birthday, I thought, let's do 40 stories, and did it. And many of the stories didn't get many views anyway. A couple bizarrely got loads of views, but many didn't get many views. And lots of people, I think, unsubscribed because they hated seeing their feed full of Dan Jones stuff. Everything saying Dan Jones is really, if you're someone that's not on YouTube very often, and then you check back to YouTube like a week later, and you check back to YouTube like a week later, and suddenly you've got like just a feed full of Dan Jones videos. I think people were getting annoyed and unsubscribing, and so I lost lots of subscribers when I did the 40 stories in 40 days thing. But I would love to get to 100,000 subscribers, only because that's the milestone that YouTube finally kind of recognizes you as a creator. And so I like the idea of at least being partially recognized after being here since 2007. But yeah, so anyone who's got any ideas on, oh, Dan, have you tried this, or have you tried that, or whatever? I've seen a few obviously at the side, like the ASMR thing. Yeah, no one wants to, those sort of people. I'm doing that thing again where I reply to something without saying what I'm replying to. The collaborating with meditation people, honest guys, etc. My experience is that they don't ever seem to want to. They never reply to things. They never, reply to kind of trying to engage with them. Even just commenting on videos, they don't kind of seem to reply whenever I comment. Yeah, so it feels like, even though when I've attended YouTuber events, and when you attend a YouTuber event, they point out that obviously YouTube is free to the person watching the video, essentially. So we're not in competition with each other as YouTubers. The more people you can bring to YouTube, the more chance you've got of people discovering your content for everyone. And so they advise, do collaborations with people. But I have attempted to do collaborations, and so far I've never had any single person, and part of it is I do struggle with the communication from an autism perspective. I struggle to engage in a meaningful way, like when I'm typing a message, and I think maybe people pick up on that, I don't know. But as I say, I've so far never from any YouTuber had a response since I started, pretty much. I didn't do this obviously in 2007, 2008, but I started approaching other YouTubers from about 2009-ish, when oddly my channel reached a point where it came up as listed as 33rd most viewed guru in the world. And this was in the days when YouTube was much smaller. And so I thought, oh, this, maybe YouTube can be a thing. I wasn't monetized or anything at that point. I don't think I knew about that, but I started trying to approach other YouTubers, and so I started trying to reach out to other YouTubers and contacting people and saying, yeah, I'd love to collaborate, and I'd love to kind of, either come on your channel or have you come on my channel and talk to you about these sort of things. And maybe do, so more recently, focusing on maybe do some kind of joint stories and things like that, or stories for each other's channels or whatever. But it's never really, no one has ever replied, so it's never really panned out. And I have just assumed that it's not worth constantly trying to contact these people. What I'm more interested in is kind of finding out, like, I'd love not so much other meditation-y YouTubers or whatever to be the ones to engage with, but maybe the people who have the problems, YouTubers who struggle to sleep, YouTubers who have anxiety, YouTubers who and want to address that, or worry a lot and want to address that, YouTubers with things like that, who then, you collaborate and go and do a live session or two and what have you. But yeah, so I'm always looking at different ideas, and if a collaboration ever comes off, it will. But yeah, so yeah, I was worried that I was going to break going back to doing 40 videos, because that was really hard. And one of the hardest things was trying to come up with 40 totally unique stories. Authors, I know a lot of authors, and authors will say, oh, I spend like a year working on my book, or I spent 3 years working on my book, 2 years of research and a year of writing it. And even short story authors, I know some people who write short stories for magazines and things, will say, yeah, it takes me like a month to come up with an idea and to flesh it out and think, what am I going to do? How's the story going to go? And then I write my 1,500 word, 2,000 word, 3,000 word story, whatever. And to do 40 stories back to back, I was essentially having to come up with 40 stories in a row, totally different, that all, when written out, are perhaps 4,000, 5,000 word long stories. So, that's not necessarily an easy thing to do, and not something I would want to do again. I have been releasing a few stories lately, but I generally try and ease off doing so many stories, because it's very hard work to do. Especially the more stories I have, the harder it is to come up with ideas that seem unique enough that when I'm doing them, I don't just get halfway through. I've got a lot of stories that will never see the light of day, where I've got halfway through a story and just thought, nah, that's too similar to the one I did then, and then I just scrap it, and I stop halfway through recording and just turn it off. And so there's a lot of stories like that where it's just too similar, and I want something different, something that people won't listen to and know where it's going. But yeah, anyway, I should go. I like a nice round number, so it annoys me, because I'm now at 2 hours 17 minutes and 2 hours 18 minutes. That's not an ideal round number. 220 would be good. Maybe I'll stop at 220. I have done a few life in the day as an autistic person type videos. Going back, I don't do vlogging at all now. In fact, I'm much more comfortable doing what I'm doing right at this second. I'd be much more comfortable doing like a daily live video like this than a vlog. But vlogging, I back in 2007, when in the days of old-fashioned mobile phones, where the camera is only on the back, and so you can't actually see what, if you face it at yourself, you can't see whether it's looking at you or whether it's got like your nose upwards or something in it. I used to film videos of what I'm getting up to every day, and I'd walk around the local area chatting to camera about what I'm getting up to, and I'd upload it to YouTube, and no one would watch them, because vlogging wasn't a thing in 2007. And people would say, oh, that was weird. Who wants to see me literally walk around chatting about what it's like in the middle of the countryside or something? But that's what I used to do. And then, and I used to share, my brain's always active, so I used to share therapy tips and things, and I'd share things about different ways I've helped people and different things people do to help themselves, all sorts of things, just in a kind of vloggy kind of way, rather than a, I'm going to make a video just about this one type of, like I could say I'm going to make a video about 7-Eleven breathing, for example, and then I'd sit down in front of a camera like this and I'd talk about 7-Eleven breathing. So instead of doing that non-vloggy way, I'd be walking, say, down a country road, and I'd be talking about the fact I was thinking about 7-Eleven breathing and how brilliant it is as a technique and why it works. So I'd throw in things like that as well. And obviously I've done lots of videos about being autistic since being diagnosed. And so I used to do vlogging-y stuff, and then because no one ever watched it and it wasn't really a thing, it wasn't, people were just saying I was weird for doing it. No one would ever watch it. Like unboxings, I used to do unboxings of things I'd buy, like cameras and shoes and things, and people would say, who wants to watch someone open something they got? What kind of weird thing is that? Now people seem to have channels making a living out of opening boxes of things they've got. But in 2007 and 8, that wasn't a done thing. So I stopped doing that as well, because people said it's weird watching a friend, because people watching it would be people that know me, weird watching a friend open something that they got. So I stopped doing those sort of things. But I have regularly, more recently, thought, oh, should I start vlogging again? Should I just say, oh, this is, this is what I'm getting up to. This is what I'm doing today. Because then I think, well, I don't do much. I avoid people. So what you would see is nearly every day, this is me wandering into town to go to a coffee shop to do some work. This is me coming home from the coffee shop. If I did a vlog similar-ish to this, but edited, as some people do, where they don't actually... oh, yeah, there was the one of me petting a kitty as well, yeah. Anytime I saw an animal, I'd have to be down next to the animal to pet the kitty, or get a close-up of the potentially dangerous spider. Not that British spiders are that dangerous, but you get false black widows, and I'd be wanting to say, look what it is. Have a look at this. And be trying to shove a camera in its face. Yeah, no. I'm not a shopper, but I thought people might be interested. I buy weird stuff, so I thought people might be interested. Or not weird stuff, uncommon stuff. I'd buy like stuff that's more expensive. So yeah, I would adopt a wasp as well, most likely. But yeah, so I have regularly thought about the idea of either vlogging, where I take a camera and I do some, look, this is where I am, this is what I'm up to. There's not a lot I'd have to share, but doing that sort of thing. Or vlogging where you just, a couple of times a day across a week or whatever, set up a camera at home and say, this is what I've been getting up to. So I see vlogs like that as well. But yeah, my winter walks, they kind of come out of my old vlogging, that I love just sharing what I love. And I love being out in nature. And so I would literally walk down roads. As part of the vlog would be, listen to this. It's just natural sounds, just a country lane. And I used to make videos like that. And what I did, because people who've seen my Wellbeing Walks ones, some of them have been, I've passed 220 now, I'm going to have to wait for the next round figure that I want. So people who've seen some of my earlier ones will have seen where I talk, like I did, my trip out to the Bluebell Woods. And my trip out to the Bluebell Woods, and then I would vlog me going, to the train station and going to Arundel, which near where I live, and then going on walking out to the Bluebell Woods, and then me being in the Bluebell Woods and what have you. And I would then upload that, but I'm talking over it, not the whole time, but I'm saying this is what I'm up to, this is where I'm going and stuff like that. And so the Wellbeing Walks kind of have just evolved from all that, that I thought, you know what, and I've got one that hasn't gone live yet, that I haven't finished kind of processing for YouTube. But I just thought, actually, I just want the natural sounds. I just want, the bit I want to share is the experience that I'm having, not me talking about the experience that I'm having. I want people to be able to just lie back, fall asleep if you want, listening to a walk through the countryside or wherever it happens to be, and listening to just the countryside and have the experience I'm having. Lead that bit of my life that I'm having, rather than me tell you what I'm experiencing and interrupting the natural sounds because of my voice. So that's kind of how it evolved into the wellbeing walks, like the winter walks. There's a winter walk I never uploaded because where I went turned out to be slush. It snowed here in the UK. I think January, February, it snowed. Literally for about 12 hours, there was snow that you could visibly see. And in that 12 hours, or just towards the end of it, I managed to get out into the countryside, kind of, down a country lane at least, with my camcorder to film it. But it was slush. It was muddy slush. There was not... I'll have to look up that person. Yeah, it was muddy slush. It wasn't really a nice white crisp snow that I want. Yeah, I had this kind of image in my head that it's snowing. So tomorrow morning, I'm going to go down the country lane and I'm going to walk crunching through some nice white snow, and I'll have it on video and everyone will watch it thinking, oh, isn't that nice? How Christmassy does that look? And I went out into the country and it was all just muddy, slushy mess. And so I filmed it anyway, but I never uploaded it to YouTube because I thought, well, now I think it's too late in the year, but I thought, no, it just didn't look right. But I have done one going to the Bluebell Woods the other day that I haven't uploaded yet. Yeah, but yeah, so I have so I have thought about things like doing vlogging again and whether anyone would actually watch it. They probably wouldn't want to watch me vlogging. I don't know. I just don't know if I'd be any good at it. It's one thing just talking about when I used to do lots more home visits. So I used to do a lot of therapy, going to people's homes, and used to walk about 45 miles a week just between home visits because I don't drive. And so that's why I did a lot of recording in 2007 onwards, because I don't drive, so I'm walking around roads. So I may as well just chat to myself and have a camera on me. And then as time went on, obviously I stopped doing that because no one was watching it, and it was just thought of as weird. And then I did a couple of them. So I've done like, a day in the life of an author, and what it's like to be autistic, a day in the life of someone autistic, and showing kind of getting a sensory overload and stuff like that. But yeah, I was talking on and off during my last one. But yeah, so I don't mind doing those sort of videos. It's just whether, don't know, I might give it a go. But any ideas that anyone has for things, I'm always up for trying new things. Ventriloquism either freaked people out, some people. So it seemed to be a love it or hate it thing. People either got freaked out seeing my hand talking to me and hypnotizing me, or they thought that was really weird and cool. I used to make all sorts of different kind of interesting hypnosis videos, like influencing the viewer to have their hands come together or apart, or influencing the viewer to fall over. I used to do all sorts of different things like that. I used to do things like sitting next to people in cafes or on the bench in a park or something, and putting them to sleep next to me so that they zonk out, and then just standing up and walking off. But I was much younger then, so I used to do all sorts of things to try and come up with fun ideas to demonstrate what you can do with hypnosis, but not stage hypnosis-y things. And obviously I've uploaded lots of things like me doing therapy and hypnosis as examples of things, and shared lots about mental health, because obviously I've spent over 20 years working in mental health and in parenting work and stuff like that. But a lot of it over the last few years hasn't been popular. The only thing people have seemed to like, it used to be the other way around. In 2007 and between 2007 and 2009, it was my bedtime stories no one cared about, or pretty much, and my videos talking about mental health and therapy and things like that, everyone loved, and they got lots of views. And then it flipped around. I have considered podcasting. It flipped around the other way, and now my stories are the ones that are popular, and all my stuff around mental health and autism awareness and how to do different therapeutic things and techniques and things like that, none of that's really popular, but the stories are, comparatively. I've considered podcasting. I've done some. I used to podcast regularly, and used to try and interview people, as well as just doing my own stuff. I then cancelled. It didn't get any real views, so I cancelled that in I don't know, 2011 or something. And then I took up podcasting, or I've done it a bit differently. I've now got my Dan Jones Hypnosis podcast, but most of it now is just the bedtime stories and self-hypnosis, self-help stuff. There's a chance I'll add other stuff to it, but I don't yet know whether I'm going to keep it going, because although it's popular, the free part of it's popular, it obviously costs money to host it, and it doesn't make enough income to cover its hosting yet. I know almost no one with autism. So I obviously know people kind of professionally who know people autistic, and I know a few people on like Facebook that are autistic who friended me because of it. But actually, personally, in my life, I'm sort of the autistic one, and everyone else is the kind of normal one, as it were, as people I think see me. Prior to my diagnosis, it was I'm Spock and everyone else is normal, which I was more than happy being Spock, and still am more than happy being referred to as Spock. And on my wedding day, which anyone who's watched my wedding video on my channel from 2014, I got married in 2014, and my face cried. It was very weird. All I had to do was thank all the guests for turning up and thank the caterers and all this rubbish. And I stood up to thank everyone, and my face started crying, and I got really confused. I thought, have I just broken or something? What's gone wrong here? And so my best friend had just given his speech, where he ended it kind of saying something about his Vulcan friend, and that's what he'd always known me as since being. I've known him since he was 14 and I was 19, so long before I had a diagnosis. And so I thought. So he obviously referred to me as his Vulcan friend, and he referred to my wife, pointing out how she's turned my Vulcan friend into someone who now vaguely appreciates food and isn't just all entirely black and white, etc. But yeah, when I started crying, the advantage is that I don't normally sort of cry at that kind of thing, and so it works really well. A tip for anyone who's not married yet, who's getting married: cry when you're standing up in front of everyone and everyone bursts into tears around you, and then everyone says that was such a moving speech, even though you talk complete rubbish. So that sort of worked in my favor, because everyone suddenly found my speech, which was "Thank you for coming here." They said that was so moving. So that works really, really well. But yeah, I just felt like something had gone wrong with my face. I couldn't really understand it because I didn't have any feelings. Like, I couldn't, if someone said describe a feeling, I didn't have any feelings like that I could describe. It was just my face is leaking all of a sudden, and I can't seem to stop it. So yeah, but I'm sort of the autistic one among everyone I know. But I have done a couple of videos. I did a video on my channel with a 17-year-old autistic lad about his experience of being autistic, and I've looked at trying to link up with other autistic people, but possibly because we're all autistic, there seems to be a bit of difficulty collaborating with them as well, with actually getting the communication. So Anyway, I've got to go because it looks like I've kept people for so long that they're going to start peeing themselves as well as me if I'm not careful. So it's about to go to 2 minutes 35. That's a good enough time period. Yep. So anyway, thank you all for tuning in. Those of you that have been here and joined me on this 2 hours, 35-minute journey. And if you want me to do more live stuff, I'm more than happy. And you can suggest times that you would like, ideally English times, UK times, so I can, especially English times, so that I can then know what time you actually mean. And I'll try and get on and do maybe some live things more regularly if it's what people want. So anyway, I will see you later. Thank you all for dropping by.